day of December. Just to make you all aware, today's meeting will be recorded. Can I also welcome any members of the press or public to today's meeting? Kindly, can I ask you kindly to observe the meeting only and not to speak or participate? Can I please remind you all to switch your telephones and mobiles to mute for the duration of the meeting? In addition, can I refer you to the protocols for remote meetings, which have been previously circulated and obviously which you're all aware of. Your microphones should be switched to mute unless you are speaking, and also should you wish to ask a question or make a comment, can you please indicate either by the chat function or by raising your electronic hand via Teams. For today's meeting, I will assume that you've all read the paperwork, and when asking a question, can you indicate which page number you were referring to? I say using the chat function, only use it to speak as an alternative to the electronic hand or to raise any technical issues. Before I go to the first item today, I wanted to relay this committee's concerns and my own concerns in relation to the size of the agenda. I understand the decision-making process has been amended to help with the pandemic. However, the amount of reports on today's agenda makes it hard, if you like, for everybody to read the papers in depth when we get them for only a couple of days. And I think that will need to be considered for future meetings. Altogether, there were 26 items, between cabinet scrutiny and the cabinet, today agenda items. So, look at that for the future, please. The first item on the agenda is to do a roll call. I'm Councillor Mike Harvey. I'm chairing the meeting. Can I call on Charlotte, please, to take the roll call? Thank you, Charlotte.
Chair. Yeah, so I've got you down as present, and we've had apologies from Councillor Rahman. Councillor Freegard.
Present.
Councillor Nigel Hunt. Steve Hunt.
I'm here, Charlotte, thank you.
Councillor Dennis Keogh.
Yes, Charlotte, I'm here, thank you.
Councillor Simon Noyle.
I'm here, thank you, Charlotte.
Councillor Alan Llewellyn.
Present, no, Charlotte. Yes, we're here, thanks.
Councillor Sandra Miller.
Present.
Councillor Rydian Maisen.
Yeah, present, Charlotte.
Councillor Del Morgan.
Present all.
Councillor Suzanne Patterson.
Present.
Councillor Lynette Purcell. Oh,
Present.
Oh, you are here, thank you.
I've managed to do it, thank you very much.
We've had apologies from Councillor Penry. Councillor Sonia Reynolds.
Present.
Wyn Woolcock.
Present, all present, Chair.
Cabinet members. Councillor Rob Jones.
Apology, Charlotte, he's got a hospital appointment.
Thanks, Deputy Leader. Councillor Edward Latham.
Yeah, present, Charlotte.
Councillor Carol Clement Williams.
Present, Charlotte.
Councillor Doreen Jones.
Present.
Councillor Alan Lockyer.
Apologies from Councillor Lockyer, Shah.
Thank you. Councillor Peter Rees.
Present, Charlotte.
Councillor Peter Richards.
Present, Charlotte.
I've had apologies from Councillor Wingrave. Councillor Leanne Jones.
Present, Charlotte.
Thank you. And then if I move on to officers, Karen Jones.
Present, Charlotte.
Devons.
I am present, Charlotte, but I will have to leave, unfortunately, at 11 o'clock for another meeting with Estin.
No worries, thank you. Howell Jenkins.
Present.
Andrew Jarrett.
Hi, Charlotte. Is Kerry Warren here instead of Andrew?
Oh, thank you, Kerry. Nicola P.S.
Present, Charlotte.
Nick Griffiths.
Present, Charlotte.
Hugh Jones. No. Furlow.
Present.
Mike Roberts.
Present.
Simon Brennan.
Present.
Kerry Morris.
Present, Charlotte.
Rob Davis,
Present.
Griffiths,
Here, Charlotte.
Peter Jackson,
Present.
Claire Jones,
Present.
Mark Thomas, Lana Bynan, Rhian Heaton,
Present.
Nick Clark,
Present.
Chloe Plowman,
Present.
Tammy Davis.
Present.
Have I missed anyone at all? No, Chair, I think that's everyone.
Lovely, thanks for that. Item 2, declarations of interest. Any declarations of interest, please? No, don't see any. Item 3, minutes of previous meeting, pages 5 to 8, meeting dated the 4th of November 2020. Does anybody have any comments on these minutes, please? No, everybody happy? Can I have a proposer for the minutes, please?
I'll move, Chair.
Thank you. Seconder, please.
Second, Chair.
Okay. I say thanks. Those minutes go as they are then. Item 4, verbal update on test, trace and protect. Mrs. Pierce, are you taking this, please?
Perhaps I'll take Chair. What I'll do, I'll give a brief update initially. I'm aware that Karen has sent an update to members, but I'll perhaps spend a few minutes just maybe putting a little bit more meat on the bones in terms of what's been circulated, and then myself and Nick will be more than happy to take any questions, Chair. Okay,
great. Thank you, Kerry. Go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, as I said, I will be covering a little bit of ground today, and I appreciate that there's a lot of statistics and a lot of issues to cover. As you can imagine, Chair, there is a lot going on at the moment. But should members sort of miss anything, I'm more than happy to just circulate a note following this discussion, so that members don't miss anything in particular. In terms of the figures, I'll just run quickly through it. I should sort of stress it is very much a snapshot in time. Members will, I'm sure, appreciate that the situation is very dynamic at the moment. There's a lot going on, and the numbers are very much increasing, as you will already be aware. But just to give you a few statistics about where we stand at the moment, within the Swansea Bay region as a whole, over the past sort of 7 days, we've received 2,604 new index cases, and there are nearly 5,000 associated contacts with those index cases. Looking at Neath Talbot in particular, specifically, over the past 7 days, we've had 1,124 cases, and we have 2,536 contacts associated with those cases. And what seems to be a consistent theme, what the epidemiology is showing, is that there consistently appears to be more contacts associated with each case in the Neath Talbot area than in Swansea. So that's a point maybe worth noting. In terms of where we sit nationally, again, it's doesn't make good reading in terms of the figures. The 7-day case incidence figure, we're currently ranked highest in Wales, with, as of this morning, 697.1 cases per 100,000 population. Merthyr is coming in at a close second at 668, and Swansea is ranked 5th in Wales at 549.8. In terms of test positivity, Neath Talbot again is ranked at the higher echelons across Wales. We're ranked 2nd only to Merthyr. We're currently at 25.5% positivity rate. And in comparison, Swansea is at 23%. In terms of the age group breakdown of the cases, they are predominantly within the working age population, 40 to 49 and 50 to 59-year-olds. But in recent weeks, we have seen increases in numbers of cases in the younger age groups, so 10 to 19 and 20 to 29 age groups. So that's sort of been closely monitored and sort of analysed as we speak. In terms of clusters and exposure locations. We currently have a total of 22 care homes with an ongoing outbreak. So there is, a high level of concern over the stability of the care home sector and community care more generally, and business continuity issues are inevitably being experienced at this point in time. And there are also a number of clusters in both open and closed workplace settings across Neath Talbot. In terms of our schools, 27 schools in total in Neath Talbot have reported more than one case in the last 14 days. This is, however, more likely to be on the back of increased transmission within households, as the evidence is continuing to show that there's not widespread transmission within the school environment. Evidence is, however, showing that much of this transmission within the school age is happening as a consequence of what's happening at home and also other sort of out of school activities, birthday parties, sports training, even sleepovers. So that's a real issue that is causing some concern. So, I suppose the broad picture is, whilst inevitably there is transmission within school, I think the evidence is showing that, generally speaking, the schools are providing a COVID secure and controlled environment. The TTP service has developed strong working relationships with senior management within our education department, and there is regular dialogue going on between the TTP service and primarily our regional EHOs and our head teachers. That is very much a positive to take from where we are. In terms of TTP resilience, the challenge at the moment is the workload is extremely high, and the service is very much under strain at the moment, struggling with caseloads. We are seeking mutual aid on a daily basis. There has a national surge team has been set up whereby requests are put in across Wales, but given the demand that's currently being experienced across Wales, if I'm honest, there's not a huge amount of levels of mutual aid being received, albeit every little bit we get is obviously very much well received. We also have a finite resource in terms of our staff, particularly at the regional level, which are populated by our experienced EHOs. And of course, staff well-being is a concern at the moment as well. There's a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety dealing with the difficult situations on a day-to-day. In terms of how we're responding very quickly, we are currently in the midst of a rolling program of recruitment for our tracers, advisors, sort of supervisor roles and data analysts. And we do have as much as 80 posts to be filled to achieve what we would regard as our optimum capacity. So that process is ongoing, but logistically it is taking a lot of time to get the right people in the right roles. So what we are doing also, in the interim, and this has been discussed over the past sort of day or so, is that we are currently looking to recall staff that were previously redeployed to the service, to build that resilience in the short term while recruitment sort of continues. We are also looking at putting in place a prioritisation framework, because at the moment there's not really a clear steer coming from Welsh Government in how to deal with the cases, the level of cases that we've got. So we have this morning, and we will be over the coming days, putting in place a framework to make it sort of the best possible chance of getting on top of the numbers of cases that we've got. So that is ongoing. A couple of last points really on COVID enforcement. Members will be aware that we do have a team of enforcement officers that have been recruited, and they are working with the TTP, environmental health, health protection and licensing teams respectively, to get boots on the ground in terms of dealing with business premises and ensure that there is compliance. And we do have a lot of visibility within our communities, and we are getting a lot of good feedback in terms of that pool of staff. And we are also, of course, working with the police closely in the joint enforcement teams to ensure that a coordinated response is delivered. And lastly is the point on communications. We are, of course, working very closely with our comms colleagues. And I think perhaps the message at the moment is individual behaviour is key. I think the evidence is that individuals' lack of care and responsibility is perhaps driving the numbers locally and indeed across Wales. There's a lot of COVID fatigue in our communities, and I think lack of sort of compliance with self-isolation requirements is also a concern, and this is obviously making mitigation measures difficult to develop and implement. So I think there's been a marked change in terms of the tone of comms in recent days, and we're challenging people to really step up and sort of deliver on their levels of responsibility. But it is very much a concern. I appreciate that we cover, I've covered a lot there, and as I said, there is a lot going on. I am happy to circulate the note that I've prepared to members after this meeting, but I'm happy to take any questions, shares as we stand.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Kerry. I think it's exceedingly worrying times. I'm absolutely amazed how the rate's gone so high, but hopefully, with measures being put in place, we can start bringing it under control, especially with Christmas. So you got 3 indications for questions. Councillor Alan Llewellyn, please.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks to Kerry for the presentation. It will be helpful to have a copy of that note, I think, and I'm sure that Kerry will pass on over thanks to everybody that's working under very high pressure in the TTP team. I've got a couple of questions, Chair, which I indicated 2 of them yesterday, but I just got a quick additional one, if that's all right, coming from what Kerry just said. He was mentioning the COVID enforcement joint teams, and I'm wondering if during his replies he'll be able to perhaps give us some examples of the sort of action that those teams have had to take. I don't want individual cases or premises or businesses, but just for us to have an idea of the sort of enforcement action that now has to be undertaken. But if I get back to the questions that I had indicated yesterday, Chair, if I can ask first of all, given the current very high and disturbing levels in Neath Talbot, has consideration been given to possibly the support of Welsh Government and the health authorities to the introduction of wide-ranging asymptomatic testing that has been implemented in some local authorities in Wales and in England, and indicates some measure of success. I know the jury is out, as the Chief Medical Officer said yesterday, about it overall, but is consideration being given to introducing those measures, and what would the capacity of the different authorities be to implement such measures? And then perhaps, Chair, I can come back to my second question after Kerry's replied, if that's okay with you.
Certainly.
Thanks.
Kerry?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Just to pick up maybe on the first point, maybe give an example of what sort of work the enforcement officers are doing. What's essentially happening is that the regional EHOs that are embedded within our regional sort of tier of the service are gathering intelligence of where there are sort of cases emerging and clusters of cases emerging. As I've mentioned, some of those are in workplaces, the retail sector. So there are close coordination going on between the regional EHOs and our enforcement officers, and the enforcement officers are then going out to discuss with these workplaces and premises what measures that they've got in place to make them aware of what they should be doing, and are they complying with what they should be doing. So it's very much linking up with what the intelligence is showing as the cases are emerging. That's essentially what the role of the enforcement officer is getting out there. There's only so much we can do having sight of the statistics. It's obviously that step further to get out into the communities and have those conversations and be visible to make sure that there is club compliance going on. In terms of the testing question, if I'm honest, Councillor, I'm a little bit less cited on the extent of testing. What I would say is all options are being considered at the moment. I think it's probably fair to say that widespread testing is not currently seen as the solution within the local context. My understanding is that what has been rolled out within the Merthyr area is that they're only hitting really 1% positivity rates in terms of the testing that is coming through. in terms of where we are in our local capacity, it is, demand is huge at the moment. The testing requirements are going through the roof. I think our Margam facility is at 100% capacity at the moment, and indeed as our mobile testing units, and they are looking at potentially ways to how we can bolster and build upon the testing capacity within the local context. I can see maybe Karen's got a hand up, so maybe Karen can add a little bit more in terms of where we are with testing, but that's perhaps as far as I can advise, Councillor.
Karen, do you want to come in, please?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I thought it might be helpful if I just add to what Kerry's just said, really. As I put in my note earlier on in the week, I don't know whether members were familiar with the incident management team process that we have, but more or less since we reached about 50 cases per 100,000 population, that incident management team has been meeting several times a week. And its job is to look at the latest data and the latest intelligence that we've got about the way in which the disease is behaving in our communities, and then to review the control measures that we've currently got in place. And that includes the communications, the enforcement, the whole approach that we're taking across the region to COVID, and then to make recommendations about any further actions that we need to consider in light of the most recent intelligence. So things like the mass testing that we've seen in Merthyr have been considered within that process. But at this moment in time, Councillor Llewellyn, the expert advice that we've had from Public Health is that particular measure would not help us to bring this size of a problem under control. And it's also going to be stretching the resources that we've got locally, which of course now is supporting the mass vaccination programme as well. It would stretch resources that need to be targeted at other measures. So to answer the question, the mass testing has been considered, but for the reasons that Kerry said and the reasons that I've just said, it's not seen as one of the interventions that is going to help us right now. What we have raised with Welsh Government, and there were discussions yesterday, is what we need to see now is the restrictions that were put in place last Friday, what impact that's going to have. But I think it is inevitable, given what's happening right across the South Wales area, that there will be some additional national restrictions that will need to come in fairly quickly. Whether that's before the Christmas break, we'll have to wait and see, because I think, as we saw from the Chief Medical Officer yesterday, there are obviously active discussions taking place at Welsh Government level at the moment. Looking at the figures this morning, there are a number of authorities now, about 500, and cases are continuing to escalate. So I just wanted to give members an assurance that these control measures are looked at several times a week. There's quite a number of people involved in that process. We've got our public health experts around us, but at the moment that is not a recommendation from the IMT. But we have raised with Welsh Government the needs for some further restrictions to be able to bring this under control. And of course, there's other considerations then that have to be given when you are considering those wider restrictions. So that's all I wanted to say, Chair, just to give members an assurance that these are kept under review, 3 times a week at least.
Lovely, thanks for that, Karen. And Councillor Llewellyn, another question, I think.
Yes, thanks for both those replies. And yes, Chair. I mean, I'd like to reiterate the thanks that Kerry gave to the test and to the tracking team for the support that they give to schools. I mean, I know as a governor how closely they've been working with schools, the advice they give about isolation periods, the type of correspondence that needs to be sent to parents and so on. And yes, they have developed a good relationship there, and it's been increasingly complicated patterns, obviously. And as we all know, and I have engaged in correspondence on this during the week, but I need to ask the question in scrutiny. There's been a lot of discussion on the issue of term dates, and for schools transferring to distance learning for at least part of the remaining period of the term. Now, personally, I wish there'd been a decision, sort of early on this, but I understand that there are further discussions, taking place even this week with Welsh Government and the teaching units and so on. I think that, the issue that's concerning, obviously there's a huge amount of concern for, with parents, with pupils themselves, with staff. And I think one of the key problems, there are good measures, there are conscientious measures in the schools, but a relatively small number of cases, as mentioned by Kerry, actually has the effect of leading to large numbers, year groups, staff, potentially parents as well, having to isolate. So a relatively small number of actual cases in the school, however they're transmitted, triggers an extensive response, which is necessary, obviously, of isolation. And the closer that we get to the Christmas period itself, the greater the risk that some of these isolations will actually go over the Christmas period. That affects families, it affects staff, it affects the ability of people to participate in the measures that are being allowed nationally in Wales and the UK for Christmas. And and one of the upshots of that, we know from what people are telling us as members that a lot of children just won't be in school next week, even if they're not formally isolating. Now that means that they won't be, those children that won't be coming to school, if you're not providing distance learning, they won't be receiving the education that we want them to have. No, I know the advice has been given epidemiologically, I can't say that properly, and everything about the actual rate of transmission is the impact that I'm referring to here. And I think that we are running short of time on making decisions on this, but I think that one of the things that's happened yesterday, which is a change of circumstances, is that the Welsh Government guidance on isolation periods has actually changed from 14 days to 10 days for contacts or potential contacts. Now, surely that gives an opportunity, even at this stage, to say that we can transfer to distance learning even during next week, and ensure that if there is a case that's identified, that there is still an opportunity to isolate within the new guidance before Christmas. This is really something that parents, I realize there are other issues for parents that need to work and everything. None of this is easy, but I think that having that sort of compromise for part of next week would reassure a tremendous number of people. So I'd like that to be considered urgently and further. Thank you.
Mr. Evans, you coming in on this, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I do sympathise with many of the points that Councillor Llywelyn has raised there. And it is going to be a question of balance. As you said, there are arguments on both sides. We have to take the epidemiological advice in this matter as well. And, we are aware that, yes, there will be some pupils who may be engaged with distance learning activities. Unfortunately, there will be others who will be out and about within the community. We're also aware of the needs to secure pupil equity in all of this, and the safeguarding considerations must also be in the forefront of our minds. As you said, things are changing quite rapidly. We do have a meeting later today with the Education Minister, so all directors of education in Wales will be meeting with Kirsty Williams at 2 o'clock, and we await the outcome of that meeting. At the moment, all our schools will be closing on the 18th of December for pupils. The other thing that we also are aware of is to understand as quickly as possible what the opening arrangements will be in January, because we are literally 6 days away, or 6 school days away from January. And I think we do need to build into our thinking the opportunity for schools to plan how that opening will be facilitated, and how does it then fit in to a wider whole Wales policy and strategy on seeking to suppress the virus. So as I say, at the moment, the intention is to run up until the 18th of December. And we will be working with our schools to understand how we can open safely in January. But as I say, things could possibly change following a meeting with the Education Minister later today, and we will obviously keep yourselves informed. We will keep schools informed and others. But you know, it is a balance between securing, as Kerry indicated, schools are providing controlled and safe environments for young people. Yes, there have been increases in the 10 to 19 demographic in particular, but in the main, you know, it's a case of securing that balance and making decisions in the interests of all pupils. And that does include some of our most disadvantaged and most vulnerable pupils at the same time. Chair.
Okay, thanks for that. Councillor Steve Hunt, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm not going to repeat Alan Llewellyn, the Councillor Llewellyn's comments, and many of them I associate with and agree with, except for the thanks to this authority for the TTP and the other work they're doing to keep our communities and constituents safe. I just wanted to ask on the school, I thank Aled for the response there about the meeting with Kirsty Williams today. He will be aware I sent an email to him, the cabinet member, chief exec, leader, etc., in reference to the schools and how, if I can say that word, the epidemiological advice goes. Again, I would like to ask and get an understanding as firstly with Kerry when he mentioned reference to how we gather our data as to making decisions on that data, coming from schools, etc. I mean, Alan, again, as I said, I won't repeat the made good points with reference to taking it home and bringing it into the communities from the schools and the children themselves and the teachers' well-being. I just wanted to understand that while we are guided by Welsh Government, other authorities are making different decisions. So that's the point I'm trying to make. Isn't it the case that irrespective of the evidence and the advice, you as the leaders of this authority, educational director, cabinet member, leader, chief executive, etc., are still in the position to make an educated decision on how we keep our schools safe and make sure that those associated within our communities from the schools and teaching are also safe. Just as Bridgend have announced only yesterday that they will be shortening the Christmas closure period by a further 2 days than ourselves. So they have gone down the road of making that decision based on the evidence that they've received also. So I just wonder, and I'm not going to make reference to other parts of Wales, but I just wanted to get a better understanding. But I do welcome what Aled have said about the meeting with Kirsty Williams today. Maybe after today's meeting, we'll have further information of where this authority might go. But those are just the few points I wanted to raise in how we are dealing with this pandemic. But finally, just let me say that I really appreciate and associate myself with the excellent work that you are delivering on. I suppose it's a matter of opinion in that respect, as shown by Bridgend Council and others. Thank you.
Okay, before we go any further, we've spent about a half hour on this point and we still on the first item today, so if we can keep where possible, the questions shorter and the answers a bit shorter, because we've got a lot to go through. Mr. Evans, you got your hand up, please.
Yeah, that's fine. I would agree with what Councillor Hunt has said there. It would be desirable to have a consistent approach across the whole of Wales. As I said, we have to take all factors into consideration, and that does include the risk that we would have if you have 21,000 pupils not in school, and where they could be on those days, and then the risk of transmission. As I said, it is a balanced decision that we have to take.
Okay, thanks for that. Next question I got is Councillor Suzanne Paddison, please.
Thank you, Chair. And whilst I do take on board your comments about being brief, I would have to sort of stress, as you did at the beginning of the meeting, that if we didn't have 24 items, this very important item would not need to be curtailed in any way. I'm not saying you are curtailing it. You're a very excellent chair. So I just want to say that during the main pandemic in the summer, we had people standing on doorsteps clapping the NHS and really understanding that public sector workers were the backbone of our society. I just wish they felt the same for local council workers, because every time somebody breaches a rule that either the Welsh Government or we have forwarded on to them, they are increasing the workload of our public sector workers, and they don't seem to understand this. And I would just like to ask Kerry, because you were the one that was giving the briefing earlier, would you agree, Mr. Morris, that no matter what Welsh Government put in place, no matter what the scientists say, no matter what this council put out endless press releases about how we should behave, if we do not have buy-in from the public, then we are always going to be stressed out, because it's only the public that can actually bring this pandemic under control to the degree that we wish it to be. We issue all of the protocols, we tell people to keep distance, we tell people to wash hands, and I quite agree with Mr. Evans that while children are in school, they are under monitoring arrangements. They cannot disobey the rules while they're in school. When people are in pubs and clubs and things like that, they have to obey the rules that everybody puts out. I do believe that it's in people's houses that people are not obeying the rules, and I don't think anybody can expect the council or the Welsh Government to be responsible for irresponsible private behaviour. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Mr. Morris, you got a comment on that?
Yeah, I did ask
yes.
Mr. Morris if he would agree with that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And in a word, yes, I would entirely agree. I think where we're at the moment, and I did maybe touch upon it in my initial summary, is that individual behaviour is key. I mean, I think what we're seeing is that I think attitudes have changed, and we're getting feedback of that from our contact tracers and contact advisors. I think people's willingness to cooperate. You know, we've had numerous examples of people giving wrong information because of that. They fear that, you know, the implications of self-isolating for their jobs, for their personal circumstances. You know, there's a lot more to it, and there's a lot more factors involved in terms of how people respond to those calls that our staff are making. But absolutely, it is 100% down to individual responsibility, and I think there's no one particular factor driving the case numbers other than to say the issue is being driven by what is happening in people's households, what is happening with their social contacts. As Aled has touched on, the schools are providing a controlled environment, and the schools are doing remarkably well in terms of the circumstances, but it's what's happening at home. You know, we've heard numerous examples of sleepovers, birthday parties, and it's parental issues that are causing those problems. And as I said, it's ultimately individual responsibility, and I think where we're at the moment, and Karen has perhaps touched on it from the INT, is that we are effectively requesting the Welsh Government for more stricter sort of measures to get back under control the figures that we're at the moment, and it's a really difficult situation.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes, and Councillor Hunt's put in the chat there, he didn't have an answer in respect of how we cleared evidence from the schools to decide or to make decisions based on that evidence.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll quickly come back on that. Yeah. As I said, we have good contacts and relationships with our head teachers. We have a protocol in place whereby the head teachers, because essentially the head teachers are the first to become aware of having a case in any given school. You know, if we left it to the CRM or the systems in place at TTP, there would be more delays to receiving that information. So we're effectively fast tracking that information with the contact that has been made between head teachers and the TTP regional service, and the regional EHOs then make a decision following the gathering of evidence with the head teacher as to what contact the member of staff or the pupil has had, what are the size of the bubbles that are in place within the school, and then decisions are then made as to what extent pupils and staff have to self-isolate. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks for that. Councillor Sharon Freegard, please.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Apologies, but this is a really important topic, and I've got an additional question, Chair, sorry. Right, thank you, Kerry. That was a really concise briefing and very thorough. My question is about testing. I'm going to come back to testing. We're an exceptional area at the moment, Neath Talbot. I'm just focusing on Neath Talbot. We are way above 50 per 100,000. We are significantly above that, and it's a real worry. Now, I know we're doing a fantastic job with the resources that we have. However, given that we are this exceptional borough at the moment, and we are a hotspot, why aren't we having further resources brought in for the testing? Now, I understand PHW is saying that they're not going to advocate extra testing, but we clearly need more testing or more resources at the Margam point. We're way above 100%. People are being sent home after they've even been booked appointments because we cannot cope and they have to return. Now, we need obviously to have a strategic plan with the vaccination, but that is a long-term goal. We need to actually tackle what's happening now. So this 100% plus at Margam, how are we going to get further resources in, be they from Welsh Government? We need them now. And so the measures that we need now. We're not in a couple of weeks, we need them now, because obviously we don't know what's going to happen from now until Christmas regarding the opening times for schools. Should that go even higher, then obviously that's going to affect the opening of schools in January. But if I could come back to you as well, Kerry, for a plea with comms, please could they put out about events? Communities are organising events now, albeit in the good spirit of Christmas, to try and create some Christmas spirit. It's around communities outdoors, gathering for carols and singing and this and that. But really, we do not want any gatherings where we could spread the virus. So please, can we put that plea out now, Kerry, for that, for right across NPT, please? But what are we going to do and what are we able to do to help with this testing centre at Margam? Thanks.
Thanks for that. Mr. Morris, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Again, as I said, I will, if I pick up on the comms point first, comms colleagues are on the call, and we do have regular discussions with comms as to getting those messages out. And as I perhaps touched on in my initial summary, you know, the tone of those messages do need to change, and I think that is now recognised in terms of where we currently are. And I will certainly make that point about the events, because particularly as we go into the Christmas period, you know, those comms messages do certainly need to be out there. So I'll certainly take that back. Again, in terms of the testing, as I said, I know colleagues in the Health Board and Public Health Wales are consistently looking at the testing capacity locally, and I did mention at the front end that, yeah, there is a recognition that Margam in particular at the moment is running above its or over 100% capacity at the moment. So they are looking at how the means of which they can increase the capacity within the local context. We do have mobile testing units, but again, they're also at capacity in terms of so the demand that's coming their way. So all I can say at this point in time is options are being considered. And what I can do, Councillor, is I can make those further inquiries and come back to you direct on those issues.
Thank you.
Okay.
Chair, can I answer that?
Yeah, go on quickly.
Thank you, Kerry. We need to know what's going to happen. It's no good, people considering things. We need this action now, Kerry. And if you need to say that the councillors are fully behind this, then we need to do whatever we need to do, because this is not a national thing. We're talking about NPT. Thank you, Kerry.
Okay, thanks for that. And Mrs. Chief Exec Karen Jones, you got your hand up, please.
Just very briefly, Chair, just to give members an assurance, because I can sort of sense the anxiety on the call this morning, and quite rightly so as well, given the way in which our numbers are looking. We are meeting twice a week with the health board, the leader and myself, with the other chief executives and the chair of the health board, and I'll make sure that you get regular updates, because as Kerry has said, these things are being actively considered at the moment, and as the position changes, we will make sure you get an update on how things are playing out.
Okay, great for that. Councillor Reynolds, you had your hand up earlier and put it down. Have you got a question, please?
Issues were covered, and I think we don't need to take up the time, but I support other colleagues who've made points about the safety in the schools and the need to stop social gatherings, etc., and reinforce enabling the rest of our community has to work. If we're run out of schools, then community problem get to, and children being looked after. Other childcare centres can't cope, and grandparents are then in danger.
Okay, thanks for that. I think you've given us a real good air into this, a vital subject, and probably the most important one today that we cover. So thanks everybody for the input there. And I say this report is for noting. I thank you, Mr. Morris, for answering the questions. Okay, item 5, update on the COVID-19 member panel recovery phase. Unless Mrs. Jones got anything to add, we'll go straight to questions.
Yeah, I've got nothing to add, Chair. It's just you for members to just have a summary of what's been discussed so far.
Okay. In previous scrutiny, I had one indication for a question from Councillor Alan Llewellyn, please. You muted, Alan.
To apologise. Yeah, thanks to Karen for circulating the report, and thanks, Chair, for calling me to ask the question. Obviously, I'm familiar with most of what's in the report because I'm a member of the member COVID group, but I'd just like to thank all the staff that have been part of working up the ideas and bringing this information, and also to the members of the different focus groups that have also contributed, as well as to other colleagues that have been part of the group. Now, members might be aware that the name of the group has actually changed, because obviously it was originally the recovery group. I think that we all anticipated earlier in the year that we would be looking at being able to recover from the impacts of the pandemic sometime during 2020, and as we know, and we've talked about at length this morning, we're still in the throes of this pandemic. But I just wonder, as a comment, perhaps a commentary from Karen or colleagues, hopefully we're entering into a new period sometime in 2020 when the effect of vaccinations start to make their way through the population, and hopefully that we're getting over the worst of this particular situation that affects us particularly in Neath Talbot. So, in general terms, to what extent are we anticipating that we can look towards a recovery phase during the early to middle part of 2021? So how long is a piece of string question?
Yes.
But, I just value with Karen's thoughts.
Yeah, I think it is very much a moving feast, Councillor Llewellyn, isn't it? As you say, we started giving some thought to recovery in the summer in August when, you know, infection rates were extremely low at that point in time. And as we've seen, literally in a matter of weeks, we find ourselves in the position we're in today. I think we're hoping that by Easter, when the vaccination programme has made some significant progress, that we will be resuming that planning around recovery around about that time, so we can then spend some time talking with members and with our communities as well over the summer months about the shape that recovery is going to take. It's not a linear process because there are some activities that we are undertaking at the moment with recovery in mind. We've been trying to tease out the lessons learned over the last 9 months as we've been going along and capturing those so we don't lose that learning for the full recovery process. And there are some immediate impacts, for example, the work around homelessness, and trying to develop some models for moving the people who are currently in temporary housing into more permanent arrangements. There are pieces of work like that are actually ongoing whilst we're very much back in this response mode. So it's not a linear thing that we're in response and then we're in recovery. It's a bit muddled up, but as we go forward, what we're seeing is the emphasis will change, where there'll be periods of time where we'll be focusing more on response, which is where we are at the moment. But hopefully as we get towards Easter, we'll see that balance shift and we'll be spending more time thinking about recovery, but still having to keep a very close eye on the way in which the disease is behaving at that time in our community. So I can't give you a very clear answer, but that's kind of the way in which I see it working at the moment.
Thanks, Karen. I appreciate those thoughts. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks for that. In respect to this item, the recommendations on page 14, and it is for noting. We go to item 6, pre-decisions scrutiny. Select appropriate items from the Cabinet agenda for pre-decision scrutiny. Yesterday we decided to scrutinise on the Cabinet board papers items 3, 4, 7, 8, 9 and 20. So we go straight to item 3, which is a Strategic Equality Plan 2020 to 24. Unless there are any further questions, any further comments from Mrs. Jones? No? Okay, we go straight to questions. First one is Councillor Lynette Purcell, please.
Thank you very much. I've got several questions, but the first one, I wanted to thank Chris Billis for answering my question in great detail, which I submitted in advance about the Family Liaison Officer. He honestly wrote about 8 paragraphs, so goodness knows how he had the time to do that, but thank you very much. But my other questions are on page 41. It refers to staff on 0 hours. And I just wondered how many staff we have employed by the council on 0 hours, because I wasn't aware of this. I'm not on personnel. And I just wondered why we've got staff on 0 hours. If I ask all my questions, perhaps, and then we can just deal with them. On page 43, it says we will improve the physical access to committee rooms. This is extremely laudable, and Councillor Miller and myself were involved on the disabled access investigation. It sounds very good, but honestly, is it doable? And if so, when are we hoping to be able to do it? And there was one more. Oh, yeah. On page 54, in the impact assessment, it talked about engagement with the community of practice, who, as far as I can tell, didn't engage. So I just wondered who they were and why they hadn't given us any feedback. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Chief, please.
Yeah, if I just come in on the first and the third question, and Simon Brennan may have something to add on the middle one, Chair. In terms of staff on 0 hours, I don't have the number in front of me, Councillor Purcell, but we can certainly circulate that to the committee. But the reasons why people would be on 0 hours is because they've elected to take up casual contracts for work. So for example, the survey team that works out in the Environment Directorate, people make themselves available, but there isn't a specific pattern of work you know, that we can plan in advance for them. So it's a question of people have elected to be available for work, and of course they can turn it down if it suits them as well. So we will find that there's relatively small numbers of staff that we're talking about within our workforce, and there are very specific reasons why they are on that type of contract. So just to give you a bit of an assurance around that, I can certainly give you the numbers outside of the meeting. We can circulate that round to the committee. In terms of the community of practice then that's mentioned in the IIA, what we had done is pulled together the participation officers that we've got in different service areas within the council. So for example, the people that support the youth council, there's an officer that supports the looked after children's version of the youth council. We've got Grace Halfpenny that works with the veterans community. So it's that network of participation officers that we've pulled together across the council to feed in, I suppose, any views, opinions, evidence that they're aware of that can support the development of our strategic equality plan. Now, we'd asked them when we were drafting the equality objectives to give some thought to whether or not we'd selected the right objectives. Unfortunately, I think it's probably a matter of timing with a pandemic. It's disrupted what we had planned to do with them. So, you know, we're not going to initiative because it is very important if we've got people who are managing relationships with groups of people that at the end of the day our strategic equality plan is very much there to be supporting. We will need to be picking that up as part of implementation, but I think unfortunately, like many things, the COVID pandemic has disrupted the engagement work that we wanted to do through that particular network of officers. In terms of the committee rooms, it is still very much our plan to improve access arrangements for members. I think we were probably talking in terms of physical access around things like automated door opening and those kind of measures. And I'm sure that that is still in the plan, but I don't know, Simon, if there's anything specific you can add to what's already in the report, or whether, again, that would be detail that we'd be bringing back through the Democratic Services Committee that will be overseeing this work.
Brennan, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, two things. I mean, firstly, there are some difficulties in Port Talbot in terms of access, particularly within the chamber. It's not really designed particularly well for access, unfortunately. But one of the things that we've been looking at in Port Talbot, as the Chief says, there was a fair bit of work going on prior to COVID, which obviously stopped, unfortunately, because staff were diverted onto other issues. But one of the other things that we're looking at for Port Talbot Civic Centre is clearing out the old kitchen area on the ground floor, which obviously doesn't get used anymore, and making that, because that is a very accessible room, and making that accessible for meetings as well. Because one of the issues that we have with having meetings on upper floors, obviously, is that somebody within that meeting has to be responsible in case there is a fire of some sort. Somebody has to be trained to do evacuation. So it's not just making the building accessible, there's also responsibilities for people thereafter once the meeting starts, because there aren't any other staff to do that, obviously, and we're finding that's a little bit difficult sometimes with the way that meetings are set up.
Okay,
Can
thanks for that. Sorry,
I was just wanted to thank the Chief for the reassurance about the 0 hours. I'm very reassured about that. And Simon, that sounds a brilliant idea about creating a downstairs meeting room. So thank you very much for the answers to those questions.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. Next question, Councillor Suzanne Paddison, please.
Thank you, Chair. I did have a typo. I hope Charlotte has just passed that on, so she's aware of what that was. But my question is, on page 41, 4.1, the last highlighted action, we will develop BAME Equality and Diversity Action Plan. Chief, will we be anonymising things like age, sex, designation, names and ages, so that when we have applications for positions within the council, there is no unconscious bias according to anybody that may be reading those, and when will that, if it is adopted, do you know a timescale for that? Because it doesn't seem a very difficult thing to do.
Karen, please.
Get my mic off. So Sheena had already identified some work that needed to be done on her application forms as part of the gender equality work that she'd been doing last year with What I Take.
Yeah.
We've started a discussion with our trade unions and with our workforce around the race and Black, Asian, minority ethnic dimension of this as well. And we think that many of the measures that we would be looking to introduce as part of the gender equality will also assist us in terms of what you've just said there, Councillor Paterson, in terms of trying to get people to a position where they haven't got unconscious bias at that point in the selection process. In terms of a timescale, I know that that is work that Sheena has action planned. So there is a timescale around that. I couldn't tell you what that is sitting here this morning because I don't have the detail in front of me, but we can certainly let you know what the planned date for implementation of that is going to be. We're also as well looking to develop an ongoing discussion with the workforce around the BAME agenda. And I know that there are a number of members of staff who are really keen to help us with that thinking.
Excellent. Thank you, Chief.
Okay, thanks for that. Charlotte, you got your hand up, please?
Yes, Chair. I just wanted to come in just to let Councillor Paterson know that I have spoken to Karen Furlow in relation to the typo outside the meeting.
Okay, thanks for that. And last indication with a question, Councillor Steve Hunt, please. Steve?
Oh, thank you, Chair. I will be brief. Karen sort of touched on some of the points I was going to raise. It's a general question, Karen, on the whole report, really. It's a very important piece of work and it's a massive task. So I just wanted, obviously, this report was part of your previous work and now you've stepped up to Chief Executive. And I just wondered, you touched on also the resources and the implications of COVID and out of office working and everything else that goes with the pandemic, I suppose, and our resources. I just wondered, within the report, it's a 2020 to 2024 actions to meet the equality objectives. There's an ever-changing world as well, and a directorate from the Welsh Government, which is adding to the plan. So I just wondered, do we as an authority follow suit as all other local authorities in Wales, or do we prioritise? What I'm getting at, have we got to monitor and deliver? I appreciate they can come through scrutiny committees, but at the moment, they're not functioning as they would normally. So do we have to deliver upon certain aspects of the report back into full council to sign off? And if so, are there priorities within the report that we tackle first? Or is it sort of a whole document that we tackle in its entirety? And I appreciate it's a live document with the way things are changing, but I just wanted how we go about our business within producing our end result, then monitoring, and if there is such a thing as signing off. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Hunt. We've got a legal responsibility to produce a strategic equality plan, and there is a timescale around the way in which that needs to happen. The Equality and Human Rights Commission earlier this year gave a period of grace in terms of the timescale for refreshing those plans, but they've been quite insistent that those plans have to be published by the end of the calendar year. So if you remember, a couple of months ago, we brought you the equality objectives because that's one of the specific legal duties that the council has. And we said we needed to spend a bit more time working up the actions to implement the objectives, which is the report that you've got before you today. So in a nutshell, yes, it does need to go back to council for council to endorse this action plan. But for all the reasons that you've just said, Councillor Hunt, we are going to need to keep the relevance and the priorities within that action plan under continuous review, because things are changing around us, you know, and if there are more job losses, for example, in the community, it may cause us to change the emphasis around some of those actions as things unfold before us. So we have got a number of actions within that action plan that roll forward from the old plan. So those are things that are ongoing. There are some new areas of work included in there. For example, the work around the BAME community that Councillor Paterson highlighted earlier. And we need to be bringing some of those things further up our list of priorities. We had, some concerns around inequalities, didn't we, before the pandemic? But unfortunately, what we've seen over the last 9 months is inequality has widened. And there are some groups in our communities, young people, BAME communities in particular, that have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. So we need to make sure that we're adjusting our priorities to suit. In terms of, I did give an undertaking a couple of months ago that I would review the committee arrangements in January, because what we've been trying to do over the last 9 months is to make sure that we've got democratic oversight of what's going on. But as you'll appreciate from the reports you've heard this morning, it's very, very heavy workloads for staff at the moment as well, as we are having to respond to what is happening around us. So I will review the committee arrangements in January and take on board the points that were made at the beginning of the meeting about the length of the agendas. I know that scrutiny committees want to play a fuller role, but we need to make sure that we talk that through in January and find the right balance for us, given what's going to be before us in January. And I'm sure that within the Cabinet Scrutiny Committee's forward work programme, you will want to make this equality plan back before you, perhaps more regularly than you've done in the past, because it does take on, for me anyway, a much greater priority now than it's ever done. And I think it'll be very much the core of a refresh corporate plan in due course as well. So yes, it does need to go back to council. There's some important work in there that you need to be holding us to account for. But I think also as well, what we'll find as we go through next year, we'll be adjusting it as well in light of the change in circumstances.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for that, and thanks for taking on view the comments about the length of the agenda as well. So, okay, any further questions on this item, please? No. Okay, the recommendation in respect to this is on page 9 at points 32 and 33. Are we happy for those recommendations to go as they are? See a number of nodding heads and thumbs up. Anybody not happy? No. Could I have a proposal, please?
Move, Chair.
Seconder?
I'll second, Chair.
Thank you. Those recommendations go to Cabinet as they are. Item 4, comments, compliments and complaints. Unless officers get anything to add, then we'll go straight to questions. In pre-scrutiny, we have one question on this. I think Councillor Purcell, please.
Thank you very much. On page 74, it talks about details of violent and aggressive behaviour. Now, obviously, we're all as a committee going to be very concerned about any violent and aggressive behaviour towards staff. So I was just wondering if you could drill down into this. Is it a common theme? Is it on one particular subject? Is it in one to do with one particular department? Or are they random acts across the board? Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Purcell, for that question. I would say that the references in the report are specifically around individual cases that we've had during the year, where we've had some very difficult behaviours to deal with from a very small number of our residents. And that's caused us to have to think about the way in which we manage contact with those individuals. And you might recall that we've had one incident where the leader himself was assaulted by a member of the public in the Talbot Civic Centre last year. So fortunately, I think most of the people that are in contact with the council, they are perfectly polite, and we handle those contacts with no problem at all. But we have found ourselves in a position where we've needed to introduce measures to protect staff members. And in some, very tiny number of instances, I've had to take action to limit the way in which those members of the public can have contact with us. You know, we've had people who are very verbally aggressive. We have people who send persistent numbers of emails through, you know, which is very, very time consuming to deal with. But as I say, on a, you know, a very exceptional basis, we have actually had people turn up and been physically aggressive and violent within the offices, and obviously we've needed to then make sure that we involve the police and so on in that context. So that's essentially what it is, Councillor Purcell. Fortunately, as I say, they're in a very tiny number, but it has a massive impact on the members of staff. And as you can imagine, if you're sitting in the reception, you don't know who's going to come through the door. And that particular incident in Port Talbot has had a big impact on the members of staff who were actually in the building at the time. So as I say, we made sure that the people have got support, but we're just strengthening our policies and our procedures around the way we deal with that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks for that. Anybody else got any questions on this item, please? No. So the recommendation for this is on page 75, and this is for members to monitor performance contained within the report. Okay. Then going back to the agenda, we're not scrutinising, not scrutinise item 5 and 6. So the next item we're looking at is item 7, Substance Misuse Counselling Service, Western Bay Area Planning Board. Unless officers got anything to add, we'll go straight to questions. We had one question on this, and it's Councillor Steve Hunt, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As you were aware, I'm the Chair of Community Safety and Public Protection Scrutiny, and I just on page 98, Karen, and I know you've been very active in the report and in how you deal with substance misuse, and I want to put on record I'm grateful to the recent meeting of the Community Safety and Public Protection and the information that we received. As members would be aware, Neath and Talbot with Swansea were some of the highest fatality rates in Wales due to substance misuse, and it's encouraging to know that those levels have dramatically declined, and which is excellent news, and that's down to the work Karen and her colleagues, cabinet members and others have put in, certainly through this authority. So I want to be thankful for that. I just wanted to then touch on page 98 where it says a financial impact, as the proposed contained in the report includes a reduction in the contract value. This will result in the SMAF money being released to be invested in other area planning boards priorities. I just wanted to ask on that whether that would harm or affect any work that's already ongoing or future work, so that these figures do not start to increase going forward. I mean, obviously it's worked, and let's be quite honest, it's finances that are needed to a certain extent. So we have those people in place, professional people and bodies, to deliver what is needed to be delivered to safeguard and deal with drug misuse. So it was just a query as funding again. So we always speak about funding, but in this instance, I think the funding for this particular item is so critical. So I just wanted to know the thoughts and whether there is a chance of we can still receive the money that has already been consistent then over the years, but now it seems to be being dropped. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that question, Councillor Hunt. So the SMAF, the Substance Misuse Action Fund, is a grant that comes to the region from Welsh Government, and the Area Planning Board is a partnership that we are required to have in place by Welsh Government, and it's the job of that partnership then to determine how that grant is used. So that's kind of the mechanism around it. What we've got within the region are a pattern of services that support substance misuse that have been there for quite some time. And what we've identified through the improvement work that we are doing is there's a need for there to be some work to develop those services so they are more joined up around the way in which service users need to access those services. There's too much fragmentation at the moment with people being passed from different parts of the system. And what we've also got is a bit of a bottleneck in some places as well, where there are unfortunately waiting lists. And as you can imagine, if somebody's got the confidence to engage with services, you need to be able to respond in a very timely way around that. So there's a big exercise, Councillor Hunt, that needs to be got underway next year to recommission the services in the region to make sure they're better fit for purpose. And that will take a little while, probably 18 months to 2 years to work its way through the entire system. And Claire and the team will be supporting that process. But in the meantime, what we've been doing is we've been looking more critically with the new team that we've got at what the money's doing within the current services. And in this particular case with counselling services, you can see from the report that actually we put in too much money in to that service for the amount of need that that service is currently supporting. So what we've done in the area planning board is we've said we want to take some of the money that doesn't need to be in that service and we want to redirect it to help us to give more timely access to those people who need support, and the plan is to put that into what's called low threshold prescribing services. So one of the deficits in the current model is there's not enough support in primary care for people who are addicted to substances. And as a result of that, what's happening is people are staying too long in the secondary care part of the service, so in the hospital-based service. And that means then that that service is full and no new people can come into the service. So when people are stable or their needs are met in primary care, we need more capacity in that part of the system so we can make sure then that we are freeing up more capacity in secondary care for the more complex cases then to be dealt with in a more timely way. So you can take an assurance that the money is not going to be lost, it's going to go into a greater area of priority that will benefit service users and will benefit the wider system.
Okay, thanks for that. Any more questions on this item, please? No. So the recommendation go to Cabinet are on pages 101 and 102. Anybody not happy with those recommendations? Okay, I don't see any indications. Can I propose it, please?
Move, Chair.
And second.
I'll second.
Thanks, Lynette. Those recommendations go to Cabinet as they are. Item 8, Syrian Resettlement Programme Support Service. Unless officers got anything to add, we'll go straight to questions. Councillor Brydion-Meisen, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. If I may, I don't know if Councillor Freegard would ask me, like me to put it a little bit after it. Do you want me to add that?
No, that's fine, Rydion.
You do it yourself here?
You can do it.
Okay, all right, fine. Yeah, what it is, on page 137, I know this is, I know the purpose of it just to approve, suspend the contract procedure. But I was wondering, of the 10 families that have been taken in and helped, 1 turned down and 2 had left. I was wondering now why they left, or do we know why they left? And if they left, is it because the system perhaps isn't working? I was just wondering, that's all, if anybody knows.
Yeah, could I bring Claire Jones in to answer that, because Claire's been working with the families very closely since they settled in the area. She's got the detail, and I think we just need to be a little bit careful because obviously we're in open session and I don't think we want to be identifying the families. So we need to be answering in general terms, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, Claire, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say that our families have moved away perhaps for job opportunities or because they want to be within communities, different communities. So there's legitimate reasons why they've moved away, not because of what they've been offered locally, but more about what they thought they could get in other areas.
Okay, thanks for that.
Yeah, fine, yeah, fine.
Councillor Freegard, Shannon, have we got any further questions on this, please?
No, that's fine, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else with any other questions? No, the recommendation in respect to this is on page 140. Anybody not happy for the recommendation to go to Cabinet as it stands? All happy? Okay, could I have a proposer for the recommendation, please?
I propose.
Thanks. Thank you. Could I have a seconder, please?
I'll second.
Thank you. So the recommendation there goes to Cabinet as stated. Item 9 is Neath Talbot air quality. Air Quality Progress Report 2020, pages 151 to 270. Pre-scrutiny yesterday, we had a number of persons wishing to ask questions. Have officers got anything to add to the report, please?
Yeah, well, only to say that it does, in all the difficult situations that we're discussing this morning, this does paint an overall positive picture in terms of where we are in meeting our air quality objectives. One perhaps point to highlight is that this monitoring report covers the 2019 calendar year, so it wouldn't necessarily pick up the impact of the COVID restrictions. So just to make that point clear for members.
Okay, thanks for that, Kerry. First question, Councillor Lynette Purcell, please.
Thank you very much, Kerry. You've just answered my first question, which was, is this reduction in the problems generally caused by the lockdown? No, it isn't, because it was 2019. So thank you for that one. But I am very, very concerned to read on page 153 this evidence of non-compliance with nickel in Tower Terrace, which is coincidentally in my ward, but I would be worried anyway if I was a councillor in the Swansea Valley. On page 159, it identifies Wall Colmanoy as the source. But the first question, and this actually came from Councillor Woolcock via myself, because we decided to work together on this, is it just Wall Colmanoy that you think is for this, or do we monitor Vale Inco in Clydach as well, further down the valley? Secondly, if the council's aim is to minimise emissions, page 222, and if the company receives an environmental permit from the council, page 221, how is this being dealt with? Because, this is just not acceptable. It's an extremely sensitive subject as well, because Wall Colmanoy is a major employer in Pontedower, and yet because of that, we cannot allow it to cause problems for the residents in my community or elsewhere in the Swansea Valley. I also take issue with the valley's impact on page 153, which says there is no impact on the valley. Believe me, there is an impact on this valley, and I'd be extremely grateful if you could give me detailed update as to how this is going to be dealt with, because it is simply not acceptable. Thank you.
Mr. Morris, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll answer as far as I'm able to at this point in time, Councillor Purcell, but perhaps what may be worthwhile doing is I'll liaise with the officer who deals with this on a day-to-day, and perhaps we can give a more detailed response outside of this meeting. But in terms of as far as my understanding goes, it is the Wall Colmanoy issue that is causing this problem. In terms of the Inco plant in Clydach, my understanding is that metals monitoring did commence by the Old Lliw Valley Borough Council back in the 70s, and this council did continue monitoring following reorganisation of that particular site. But it has been required to relocate the sampler from where it was in Trebanos to Pontedower, I think because of the fact that the Trebanos sewage works was upgraded. So the measurements at Pontedower Leisure Centre do, however, continue to monitor the impact of nickel emissions from that Vale plant, and it is showing that it is low. So to answer your question, primarily is the Wall Colmanoy plant is the issue that is driving this factor. In terms of what we do about it on a day-to-day, it is essentially through enhanced regulation. I think this it is a responsibility on the council to regulate this particular operator, and we will be looking at enhanced regulation in terms of maintenance procedures and what are called BAT, which are best available techniques. So those conversations and those issues are ongoing at the moment. But as I said, it's perhaps best, Councillor, if I liaise with the officer that is dealing with it, and I can provide a little bit more detail beyond the discussion today.
Okay, thanks. I see Miss Nicola Pierce got a hand up. Nicola, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just reinforcing the message that Kerry has given, and to reassure the ward member, this is probably the most heavily regulated industrial operation within Neath Talbot. So we are taking the situation. Sorry, I thought you couldn't hear me there. We are taking the situation in relation to Wall Colmanoy very, very seriously. Officers with other colleagues from other organisations meeting regularly to ensure that we are securing improvements, and we have been securing improvements over the years. It's just not quite there yet, but we are putting a lot of pressure on the company, and as Kerry has indicated, we are pushing them to get to a BAT level, best available techniques. They've improved their maintenance and management systems in place, but there is further work to do. But I can reassure you that, as I indicated earlier on, this is the most heavily regulated site as far as officers within Neath Talbot are concerned. And, progress is being made, but more is yet to be done.
Okay, thanks for that. And Councillor Purcell, you got a supplementary question?
Can I just come back on that for one moment? You're telling me that this is very heavily regulated. You're telling me that it's been going on for some time. I just wondered, how long has it been going on? And how much confidence can we have if it has been going on for some time that it's going to be sorted? Yes, I will get involved in some dialogue with yourself and with Kerry outside this meeting, but it is not just me who's asking this question. There are several councillors in adjacent wards who are concerned about this. So have you any idea how long this problem has existed?
Mrs. Pierce or Kerry, please.
We will have to confirm what the levels have been over the various years prior to 2019. It changes year on year. We have been providing and reporting annual air quality reports to the Regeneration and Sustainable Development Committee and Scrutiny every year. So this has been reported on an annual basis, so it's not a new situation. The report indicates that it is improving in previous years, so it does demonstrate that the work that our officers are undertaking with the operators of the site is securing some form of success. We can provide you with the levels of the levels recorded in previous years outside of this meeting, if that's okay with you, Councillor Purcell. But as I say, we are achieving improvements year on year, and we will continue to work with the operator to ensure that we get down to an acceptable, provide that data outside of this meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Councillor Sharon Freegard, please.
Oh, thank you, Chair. My question's pertaining to page 153. Sorry, the dog is barking now, somebody at the door. Sorry about the noise. Can you hear me?
Don't worry, I know what it's like.
Right, yes, he's been quiet all morning. We're talking about I presume we're talking about the coke ovens there, where it's talking about natural dust having no impact on health and simply aromatic hydrocarbons. The coke ovens is blowing out daily, and it's obviously concerning because this report is back from 2019. This is still happening in 2020, and the byproducts of that is benzene and ammonia. So I'm wondering what measurements is used and how can they say it has no impact on health? Now, I understand it's NRW that's the monitoring body here, so I'm hoping that somebody will be able to answer that. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Morris, please.
I can try and answer it, but I might have to defer to Nick, who's perhaps got more experience in this sort of area. But yeah, I mean, in terms of nuisance dust, it does continue to be an issue in Port Talbot, albeit it doesn't affect health in the same way as the other pollutants.
Sorry, Kerry, how do we know that? Because the byproducts of that dust, if we're talking about the coke ovens, are two very serious chemicals.
Well, again, Councillor, what I'll do, I'll speak to the officer who deals with this on a day-to-day, and I'll perhaps offer you some more detailed explanation outside of this meeting. But as I said, as far as my understanding goes, there is a difference between what the impact nuisance dust has, because it is sort of a bigger particle than PM10s, or indeed, the finer particulates that emerge. And ultimately, you're right. It is NRW that are the regulatory body for Tata, but this council does work very closely with NRW and indeed the Welsh government in terms of moving forward into making progress with the Tata operations.
Okay, thank you, Kerry. But would it be possible for you to bring it back to this committee, please?
Yes, I'm more than happy to do that, Councillor. Yes.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks. Next question, Councillor Del Morgan, please.
Thank you, Chair. Diolch yn fawr. The question I've submitted in writing over the weekend relates to page 230. Before that, then, I'd say this question is to do with monitoring of grit and dust. And in the narrative, it does actually explain that included in the monitoring is that the monitoring of fly ash. So I wanted to point out that it looks as if at this very moment, Rhondda and Taf Council are in the process of approving a 90-metre stack about a mile up valley from Neath here. So I think it's important that we should be having a monitoring station and regular monitoring of what comes down the valley from that location, even though the wind is in the other direction a lot of the time. It isn't all of the time, so I would appreciate if officers could take that on board, please. My question, Chair, it relates to the summary paragraph, which is 2357, and it mentions two monitoring stations very close to each other. It says that fallout levels at Prince Street were down on 2004, but oddly the measurements were not mirrored at Port Talbot Fire Station, which is sited quite close to the Prince Street site. So I'm wondering, really, they're not producing similar results, yet they're very close together. Does this imply that there could be a degree of doubt, in relation to the accuracy of the monitoring process itself, which of course would then throw up larger questions in general? Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Morris, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And the fact that we had sight of this question prior to the meeting is meant that I've been able to speak to the officer direct. So he's given me his view on the situation. Basically, the answer is no. There's no concerns over the accuracy of the monitoring. I mean, I think the issue is that although Prince Street and the Port Talbot Fire Station sites are quite close together, it wouldn't necessarily be expected that the results, be identical and tally all of the time. My understanding is that the polluting impact of the steelworks seems to be mainly felt in the vicinity of the fire station in Prince Street, and to a lesser extent Little Warren. And the extent to which each site is impacted is dependent upon some variables. The two main ones being sort of which sources in the vicinity of the blast furnaces are making, or areas that are producing the pollution, and indeed which direction the wind is blowing at any given time. And I understand there has been bigger or more significant differences between the results from each of these sites in the past. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the accuracy of the monitoring or process itself is wrong. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to have some reassurance, in terms of our levels of confidence in terms of testing generally. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that. Any further questions on item 9, please? No. Okay, the recommendations are on page 154 in two parts there. Are we happy for that to go, or anybody not happy with the recommendations, please, to go to Cabinet? No, I don't see any indications.
Chair, I think that report is for monitoring. I don't think there's any recommendations there.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, it is for noting and monitoring. Sorry about that. Okay, thanks. And then looking at the agenda, it's been decided not to scrutinise items 10 to 18. So then item 19 to meetings. It's to resolve to exclude the public for the following items of business pursuant to regulation 4 brackets 3 and in brackets 5 of statutory instrument 2001 number 2290 and the undermentioned exempt paragraphs of part 4 of schedule 12A to the Local Government Act 1972. Could I have a proposal to go into private, please?
Chair, before we move, Chair, sorry. Can I come in, Chair?
Certainly.
Before we move into private, we've got items on the urgent report. If you could just let members know that we're not scrutinising it.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, the urgent items we're not scrutinising. So, item 19 then is to resolve to exclude the public for the following items of business pursuant to regulation 4 brackets 3 and 5 statutory instrument 2001 number 2290 and the undermentioned exempt paragraphs of part 4 of schedule 12A to the Local Government Act 1972. I have a proposal for that, please. Thank you. Could a seconder?
Yeah, I move second, Chair.
Thanks. Thanks to the press and public for attending today. So if you could now leave the meeting, please.
Second, to make sure that there's none in here. Yes, that's fine. We just need to make sure that the recording